Well, there's been mixed reaction to the name changes in the Eastern Cape, with some welcoming it as a part of redressing and the transformation of apartheid divisive legacy, while others say it is a big mistake that will have far-reaching consequences. Joining me now to expand a little bit on this is the Economic Freedom Fighters Member of Parliament, Naledi Chira, Commissioner at the South African Human Rights Commission, Chris Nissen, spokesperson for the MEC of Sports, Recreation, Arts and Culture in the Eastern Cape, Busisiwe Jamsana Mantashe, and the COI activist, Christian Martin. Good evening to you all, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Let me start with you first and foremost, Naledi. What comes to your mind, right, when you hear and you see the debate that is going on currently in the country, right, on the transformation of these divisive legacies of our past and the conversation that is going on? What does it trigger for you? What comes up?
I think more than anything, it just reminds us of how regressing we are as a country when it comes to the question of decolonization. It is a strong reminder that even during this debate, the important questions that should be asked and answered by the ANC government are still not deliberated upon. Questions like, why do we still have universities that are named after our Cecil Rose? Why do we still have our curriculum in grade 5, in grade 4? Our children are learning that our history as South Africa starts in 1652. And there's different parts of coloniality that still remain that we have to address as a country. Every single time we sing and we include these steps in our national anthem, and those are particularly the issues that we need to address with immediate effect. If anything, we have not done enough work to address the issue of decolonization in South Africa, because majority of the symbols in the country represent the conquering of African people, represent the entrenchment of the fact that we are still subhuman, because the demographics of the country are not mirrored in our reality, are not mirrored in our street names, are not mirrored in the buildings that we enter, are not mirrored in our economic hubs in Johannesburg, are not mirrored in provinces like the Western Cape. And every single day, the youth, the young people of Africa are reminded daily that their culture, that their languages, that their history, that their heroes and heroines in particular, because also the issue of women, of Black women in particular, is still another pressing issue on the question of decoloniality or decolonization, because Winnie Mandela are still not honored in the ways that they should be. And the ANC is regressing on that particular part, intentionally. So the omission of people like Robert Sobukwe and Steve Biko are things that we don't take lightly. But at the bottom of it all, the point of contestation here is that we have not moved at a pace that is enough.
Talk to me about that. Let's just stay on that point a little bit, where you're saying they are not being celebrated in the way that they should, or at least not celebrated enough. Who decides whose dignity is to be made visible? Who decides whose dignity is to be restored? I mean, there are many who've been made invisible by the apartheid system and the apartheid legacy, but who decides and who puts that measure in place as to how far that recognition or celebration should go?
Luckily for all of us, history has no blank pages. We can't now begin to question the legacy and the influence that people like Robert Sobukwe had on our liberation, had on our ideologies, had on our identity as Black people during apartheid and what we strive for. We cannot question. The streets themselves will tell you of the reverence that Winnie Mandela deserves, even though media and the ANC have tried their best to omit her name from the legacy that she rightfully deserves by placing only one man at a pedestal that she also rightfully deserves. So for that particular fact, we thank the fact that history has no blank pages. And those particular names that come up even after Winnie Mandela, even before then, are still not honored. Oman Tatisi, Queen Mantatisi are people that we know of who have had a great influence on fighting colonizers and coloniality in particular. So the issue of really revering the people that were part of making the history and what we know of it today, the issue of erasure is something that we obviously have to talk about in much more depth. It's a conversation on its own because it's very vigorous in South Africa's current day and age, because even in our history books, like I said, in our curriculums, there's no representation of how far and what were the efforts of certain people and individuals and organizations have had on the kind of liberty that we celebrate, even if it is not have come full circle, even if it is not a 360 particular question on how far we have been liberated, if we have been liberated, because at the bottom of it all, we do not have these particular rights because economically we are marginalized, because our land is still not back, and many other facets feed into the positionality of Black people.
We'll unpack that further and give you more opportunity. Let's bring in the department here and just get a sense from them. I mean, what are we doing here, Busisiwe? I mean, whenever we talk about this changes to geographic names, there's a tendency in the country, at least in the last 2 decades, to have this debate around the fact that, look, there are other more important things that we should be talking about. We should be talking about the provision of water, to the Makanda area. We should be talking about people being taxed more. We should be talking about an economy that is not growing, et cetera, et cetera. And the ANC government has gone overboard with this thing of name changes. It seems people still don't appreciate the whole idea of changing of geographical names. So what are we doing and what are we trying to achieve here? And does it surprise you at all that this debate comes up?
It actually does not, and in fact, Thabo, on when the names committee went to Port Elizabeth, now Gqeberha, the objections that came about to actually try and prevent the committee from executing the mandate of changing the names was that there's no money, children are hungry, there are potholes, why change names that do not offend anyone? But the truth of the matter is these names actually do offend those who continue to be oppressed, those who have been sidelined for years. And the argument that money should be taken to go and fix potholes actually does not hold water, because the Department of Sport, Recreation, Arts and Culture has a mandate to actually bring about transformation, contribute to the transformation agenda of the country. And these are programs that are budgeted for. So it's not a matter of monies that were meant to go build schools or monies that were meant to tar the roads are now taken to actually continue with this project of renaming towns and cities. It is not that. These monies are budgeted for, and we cannot put a price tag on the transformation agenda, because it would seem like people do not appreciate just how severe and how this actually divides us as a country, that we continue to live in towns that actually do not resonate with us, that we don't identify with. And that speaks to the apartheid government, the segregation, the oppression that was there, because people want to live in societies where they are named after their heroes, where they have a historical background, and therefore the price issue cannot continue to be put above the challenges.
But how much information is shared? I mean, yes, we can maybe blame the citizen and say, well, the citizen does not understand what we are doing. How much information is shared with the electorate during the consultation process? And I understand there is consultation, which does not necessarily mean there will be consensus and everybody will agree, but then a decision has got to be made anyway after that consultation process. But how much information is shared, for example, about how much is going to be spent, what would need to change, where that money is going to come from? As you're saying now, you're bringing in all the stakeholders, you're bringing in roads, you're bringing in those who put signage and so on and so forth to say, okay, from your budget, you are going to do this anyway, so this is where we're going now. But how much of that information is told to the public during the consultation process?
Well, the consultation is we exhaust all avenues, because first, remember, Thabo, it's actually the individuals of that particular community that apply to the names change, that apply to the department in that extension to say, we want this place to be changed. So it's not us, it's not the department, it's not the committee that goes to the communities to say, this is what we want to change this name. It's actually people. And in Port Elizabeth, the point in question, there were 4 applications to say, we want this name changed. Then the committee would consult with your businesses in the area, with your traditional leaders, all key role players, to say, this is the process that is going to transpire. We are going to do research. This is what the names that have come up are. after that, we are going to go and exhaust all avenues to try and inform the general public that there is this, and we are calling on public participation to actually participate in what we are trying to do. The most unfortunate thing, though, that we see is happening, Thabo, is that people do not attend those public hearings. The few that we see on your social media that would complain is that we complain on social media, we complain on our Facebook pages, but we don't actually take part in those democratic processes where you come and you say, I actually don't want this name to be changed. And in instances where those who come, they say they don't want the name to be changed, they would raise issues of there are tourists who are not going to come to the area because we are changing.
All right, Busisiwe, we seem to have lost you there. We'll come back and try and create that connection with you again. Joining us to expand on our conversation tonight on the transformation of the divisive legacy of apartheid through the changing of names, artifacts, cities, airports, has sparked a whole lot of debate and has received some backlash as well on social media and everywhere else. EFF MP Naledi Chirwa, chairperson of the South African Human Rights Commission. Now we're joined by Advocate Bongani Majola, spokesperson for the MEC of Sports, Recreation, Arts and Culture in the Eastern Cape, Busisiwe Jasmana Mantashe, as well as COI activist Christian Martin. You can be a part of the conversation. Tag us right now at Newzroom 405 or send us your WhatsApp questions and comments to 072-110-5584. Christian, I'm going to come to you. I mean, you're quoted as saying this is a step in the right direction. Now, if you're looking at our heritage landscape, right, is it obviously celebrated, this heritage diversity that we have in the country?
I won't say yes on that question. It's not obviously celebrated. I must say that the Khoi and San people are the most neglected people when it comes to the South African context since 1992, 93 onwards. Reason why I'm saying that is if you look at the CODESA negotiations, there was no representativity from the Khoi and San people during the CODESA negotiations. And if I go further, I will go to the Truth and Reconciliation of this country. We spoke about reconciliation and speaking the truth. There also, I think we were, let me use the word, sidelined on the Truth and Reconciliation because it was more about the struggle things and those type of things. But colonialism and the effect it had on the Khoi and San people was never been touched in this country. And I think there should be some point where we would talk about what happened to the Khoi and San people during colonization. I don't think that Thabo Mbeki would come out with his I am an African speech and speak about the Khoi and San being actually to the brink of extinction. They were killed to the brink of extinction. Something happened in this country that was left out, and that is what happened to the Khoi and the San people.
And what do you make then of this tribute now being paid to the Khoi chief, David Stearman, Port Elizabeth International Airport being changed to be named after him?
I would say it's as I've said, it's definitely something great when it comes to the Khoi and San people. You see, the step that have happened actually now, it makes us feel part of this country. It makes us feel part of transformation, reconciliation. It also makes us part of the nation building of the country. So as far as we are concerned, now we can tell our children about the heroes of the Khoi and San. When we talk about Chief David Stearman, we talk about Chief Trompeter, Eitaler, we talk about Reuters and all those people. Now we have an opportunity to tell our children that once we were also heroes in this country, that the struggle of this country did not start 1908, 1912. It started way back in the 1400s when the first stone was thrown at Dias and his people that came to Mossel Bay, you know, and that was the first thing that happened, fighting colonialism, fighting land grab and so forth. So yes, people won't only recognize us now as the history books told us as drunkards, as the history books told us as lazy people, and dacha smoking people. Now they would know really the Khoi and the San and the Xhosa people, when it came to the Eastern Cape, when it came to this country without borders, we fought about 8 of the frontier wars, of which 3 of it, the Khoi and the San people played the most important role of. Chief David Stearman fought with 3 Xhosa chiefs, kings, whatever we call it. He was incarcerated on Robben Island with the Prophet Nele. He was incarcerated. When they escaped together, but the Prophet drowned in that escape. So the role of the Khoi and San people can now be told. And that, as I've said, the beauty of a person like Chief David Stearman, if you really look deep into his ancestry, he comes from Xhosa and Griqua lineage. So that is the beauty of this man, and especially for the Eastern Cape, where we want to set an example that together we can live.
Advocate Majola, what is the view of the Human Rights Commission? Welcome, by the way, and thank you for joining us on this conversation tonight. On the conversation on the standardization of the geographical features of this country to be reflective of the diversity, but also to celebrate the dignity of those who were otherwise made invisible by our divisive past. Advocate Majola, I think you're muted there. If you can unmute yourself so we can hear you.
Well, I would say that the Human Rights Commission has not taken a position on the matter. But what is true is that, you know, the Constitution speaks of equality of everybody, of all its of South Africa's all South Africa's people, and for that reason, we would, as the Commission, support the standardization of the country. I'm sorry that I've just joined now. I was not privy to the earlier discussion, so I do not know which way it went. But generally, I think that we would support that, because then it brings about equality. The you know, the sections of the population that are in the majority should not enjoy better opportunities than those that are seen as the minorities. Everybody should count. There was a talk about the change of names and the issue of dignity, and that is very, very true. That, you know, apartheid dehumanized people and stripped them of their dignity. And the names that need to be changed actually sometimes affect or attack the dignity of people who were oppressed under apartheid. For example, you still have things like Hottentots Holland. You've got a lot of places with the K word and so on. And you cannot spare money at the expense of dignity, because the court, I think it was in Makwanyan in 1995, said that the 2 most important rights in this country are the right to life and the right to dignity, because from those rights, you then can have all the other personal rights.
Right. And the idea that we need to, I don't know, whether document this, put it in a museum. Yes, it was called Port Elizabeth before, it's called Gqeberha now. That story needs to be told so that, I suppose, for even those who are coming into the country that do not understand why it's called Gqeberha now, or might have not known, they've known it as Port Elizabeth, could go and find a place where they could read about this in a museum. It could be part of our tourist product, and so on and so forth. I mean, should we still be preserving that name?
Well, you know, there is a saying that history repeats itself. If we do not write it down so that posterity are taught about it, they are likely then to repeat the same mistake in future. Whereas if they know where we come from with all these names that we are changing now, they will know why it is not necessary. I mean, that it is important for them not to go back to there, because those were some of the names that depicted the dominance, the supremacy of some of the people. They come and find people living in an area, calling it the way they were calling it, and then they change and they call it Port somebody, you know. So we have to keep our history. We have to teach this history so that our posterity should know and they should guard so that we see the never again that Nelson Mandela spoke about.
Right. Now, Lady, what's your feeling on that? I mean, should museums be open in the name of these old city names so that that history can be documented and told?
Thabo, with this conversation, what's interesting is that we don't realize the impact of how the preservation of these colonial names has on the preservation of white supremacy and racism in South Africa. And I'll give you an example. The fact that a journalist from the ENCA can be so pervasively racist in full view of the public is because on the premises of Parliament, there's colonial statues that surround her. In the streets of Cape Town, there's colonial names that cushion the racism. And thus, even our call to get rid of these names is to that there must be no cushioning for racism and white supremacy in South Africa, because it is no longer a place.
Now, Lady, I want to get what you're saying there. Unfortunately, that connection, not so great. Hold on there. Just let's try and get you on a better line so that we can get clearly what you're trying to articulate there, because I think it's very important in this conversation. Busisiwe, you can jump in here. I mean, is there a view from the province, from the MEC particularly, of a museum, right? I tell you, this is one of the suggestions, for example, that comes from the Tourism Business Council of South Africa, that maybe a museum should be built where these past names could be documented for tourism purposes, and that could enrich maybe even our tourism product.
Perhaps not necessarily building a museum, Thabo. We've got museums across the country. We've got museums in Gqeberha as we speak. Perhaps we need to document our past, because it remains our history, whether or not it's a history that we did not choose, but it's a history we're subjected to. And therefore, moving forward, we need to go back to say, this is what happened, and this happened when, because future generations will not know that there was once Port Elizabeth, and why was there Port Elizabeth, and why are we now moving to Gqeberha? Why are we now moving to other names? So much as we don't want our surroundings, the cities that we live in and the statues, but there needs to be a place where actually we can go back to say, this is our history, this is where we are going. In that way, we are even able, Thabo, to look back and say, this is how far we've gone to redress the past. If we do not know that there was once Port Elizabeth, we won't be able to measure where we are going. We need to measure and say, in the whole South Africa, now we are done with the names that are of colonial nature. We have moved from that. So it's important that there is history that speaks to the past that we have endured, because whether we like it or not, it's our past that we were subjected to. So we need those stories, we need those facts that will be there to say, this is where we come from, and this is where we are, and this is where we are going. It's just said that 26 years after democracy, we are still having objections such as that say that people won't be able to pronounce these names. Tourists won't be able to come to the country because we are changing the names that are convenient for people to pronounce. That is not what we are in this for. Tourists, in fact, should be attracted to the country because they will learn new names. They will learn Gqeberha. They will learn that there's Onom Gqebelo, Mqibisa, and they will have to learn that. That is why you never find them sleeping in hotels when they visit the province of the Eastern Cape. They actually want to go and experience the township life. They actually want to go and sleep in rondavels in rural areas. So they actually want to come for these things. In essence, we are actually delaying the tourist attraction by keeping on holding on to this name. But it does not say that we must then not document where we come from.
Busisiwe Jamsana Mantashe, thank you very much. Stay Lady Chirwa of the EFF with us. Busisiwe Jasmana Mantashe from the Office of the MEC for Arts and Culture in the province of the Eastern Cape. Advocate Bongani Majola from the Human Rights Commission, as well as Christian Martin. Christian, I want to come to you first before we get to some of the WhatsApp messages that have come in. There is a conversation that I'm seeing on Twitter around the story of the Khoi chief David Stearman, that history has not been told. So as much as the name change is happening, for example, there needs to be a level and a degree of education that needs to come in. For example, why he kept the name David Stearman. I'm sure he's got his original name that we could be using at this particular point. Maybe could even help us with the Khoi language ourselves. But there's also a conversation around his remains. Were they ever repatriated back into South Africa? What is the story? I mean, it's the education that has not been brought in with this name change.
Yeah, I think what is important when it comes to the discussion of name changes, it should not be seen as an isolated departmental thing. You know, the important part of our democracy, especially, is when we use the IGR method. The IGR method for me is when we talk about the Department of Education, tertiary institutions must be involved in this name change, because the education part should be where children must get lessons, curriculum changes must take place. That is the first thing. The second thing is that we are talking about Chief David Stearman. We are talking about the original name of Chief David Stearman, and even the language question. You see, that is again the challenge that we have is when it comes to educating ourselves and our citizens in the country for that matter. We must remember, and we must never forget, the extent in which the Khoi people was actually colonialized. And even again, let me say, Thabo and Mbeki and I'm an African say, they were killed to the brink of extinction. One thing that I want you to remember when it comes to colonialism is a very simple strategy to use. You come into any country, you take the land and the minerals, and then you get rid of the indigenous people of that area. Now, if you look at the Khoi and the Xhosa, the difference between the two and the language that we're talking about, let me raise this. It was never the colonialist interest to use the Khoi and the San in any way. That's why for them it was to kill these citizens, the owners of this country, and to use the Xhosa people for laborers. That's why the importance of any colonialist, he first learned the language of those he's going to use as laborers. There was no need to make use of the language of the Khoi and the San people. We were actually brutalized when we speak our language as the Khoi and San people. The extent of colonialism is to get rid of the culture of the Khoi and San people, to make them something else. And therefore, if you look at the 1950 Population Registration Act, immediately is to say is that the Population Registration Act, you must remember the following. One, they came up with the 4 races. A white person is a person that is obviously white and comes from Europe and is not a colored. An Indian person, a Baud, is a person that comes from India. A native is a person that comes from Africa, an indigenous person of Africa. And then you even have an alien. An alien was a reference since 1929 to the Jews, because the Jews was running from Germany all over the world. They came to South Africa. And because you can't change the culture, tradition of the Jews, they thought of making them aliens. And then important, it came of changing the Khoi and the San people to colored people. Now, what is a colored according to the Population Registration Act, which you change a people, which is the Khoi and the San? They say a colored person is not a white person which comes from Europe, nor is he a native that comes from Africa. Now, the immediate question is, now where do we come from as the Khoi and San people? They had to get rid, it was important for the colonialists to get rid of the Khoi and the San race in this country, because after 1950, what did they do? They come up with the Group Areas Act, because now you are colored as the Khoi and San people, who's the indigenous people of this country. So that is where the land grab also started, except for 1913. They institutionalized this whole thing to get rid of the first indigenous people of South Africa. And when it comes to names, you must remember the structural oppression that Black people, Xhosa people went through, and the Khoi people was taught. They was taught as colours to say is that no, you better, you a little bit less than a white person, but far better than a Nguni person. And that is the racial games that was played. Your names was totally struck off of anything else, because look at the Xhosa people. We are talking now about the Khoisan people with colonial names.
Yeah.
You can go every 3/4 of the Xhosa people, Nguni people also have colonial names. Cyril Ramaphosa, the colonial name.
Yeah.
And so we can go on through all the ministers and the important people. The reason for that is the extent of colonialism that was put upon us.
Now, let me bring you back here. We were talking about the decolonial project, and as far as you're concerned, how we should completely remove ourselves and detach ourselves from even wanting to preserve those names of the past. But others would say, well, I mean, you're just merely erasing history, and I suppose we'll grow up with kids that do not know their history, and will have a view of the nation based on the 21st century interpretation of whoever is on at the time.
That kind of opinion is the demonstrative effort of how deeply entrenched we are in efforts to preserve white supremacy. Like I said, the issue of name changes and representation politics go further behind the issue of aesthetics. They represent, in fact, how white supremacy is enacted in communities, in societies, in interpersonal relationships. White supremacy has a very soft cushioning in South Africa. It is cushioned by each and everything that we exist upon and surrounds us. And I made an example earlier in relation to the ENCA racism incident that happened in Parliament. That happens because everything surrounded that institution is cushioned on white supremacy and preserving white supremacy. The statues of colonizers, the street names in Cape Town that resemble colonizers, the townships and all of that. Apartheid special planning is also another thing that forms part and parcel of coloniality. So the issue of coloniality goes beyond the issue of aesthetics and name changes. It trickles down to our daily experiences as Black people in South Africa, because every single thing reminds us each and every day that we do not belong here, that Africa, that South Africa in particular, does not belong to us. And it is the truth. Because to date, we own the least amount of land, and even economically, we have the lightest and slightest footprint in economic hubs like Johannesburg, which is the economic hub of Africa. But Africans do not have a fully participatory role, even in the economics of South Africa. In fact, these name changes should have been the very first things that the ANC should have done early in 1994. It can't be that people like me, who are born in a supposed post-apartheid community, are now engaging in this conversation 26 years later, almost 30 years, 3 decades into a supposed post-apartheid era, to debate the issue of why our country still resembles coloniality, why our national anthem is still an ode to colonizers, why our university curriculum is still an ode to white Africans, racist authors and writers, why our economy is still a mirror of our positionality as Black people on a daily basis, where we live, where we eat, the transport that we use, is all a manifestation of how far and how deeply entrenched colonialism was in South Africa and still is. The process is very slow. And also the issue of, I want to really emphasize the issue of women, because Black women have gone through a lot of erasure in South Africa's history. And that is why the EFF had called for Cape Town International Airport to be named after Winnie Madikizela-Nomzamo, because it is rightfully should be done in that way to preserve the efforts of Black women that they've placed in the liberation process that we are still taking on over from them, that they've passed on the baton on to us. And the issue of erasure is another important thing, because our daily experiences as Black women in this country rest upon the fact that the reminder that capitalism manifests itself through racism, patriarchy, and misogyny, and homophobia and transphobia, and all these other oppressions that come up. They are all cushioned on capitalism. They all survive on white supremacy. And that is why Black people become a spectacle in the manifestations of these different oppressions. So even when we talk in conversations about renaming places, it is not just an aesthetic exercise that we are trying to engage ourselves in. It is a quest to ensure that Black consciousness is entrenched in the minds of young people coming up, who must know that when they are walking through streets, they're walking through the streets that are named after greats. When they go into hospitals, they are going to hospitals that are named after greats. When they study in their curriculum, their history does not start from 1652, but is able to document Africans' existence prior to that, during to that, and the victories that they've done even during colonialism.
Right,
so the issue of name changes goes much beyond and further than that. That is why we have to not digress and entertain conversations around, is it the right time? It is the wrong time because it should have been done in 1994.
Okay, let's look at what people are saying now on social media. We've been requesting these comments. Let's look at WhatsApp, some of the messages that have come through this evening to what people are saying tonight. This is, of course, the conversation around the changing of names in the Eastern Cape. The Department of Arts and Culture should invest in dismantling the chiefdoms and put democracy in these areas. No one should rule the people by birthright, but by the vote of the people. Changing names of towns and streets for me is changing face value. Changing names of previous oppressors doesn't deal with transforming current oppressive regimes within our democracy. Kings and chiefs must be done away with, and this will be the heritage of the future generations, ensuring they are equal and born with equal opportunities. That is a mouthful. There is a lot that has been said there. Let's just stick with that one for a bit, and then we'll go to the other ones. Advocate Bongani Majola, just tackle for me what this a viewer is raising. Bapiwe Emonti saying the real challenge of our time is actually the current oppressive regimes within our democracy of kings and chiefs, and this must be done away with. You can unmute the advocate.
Well, thank you very much. I have sympathy with what he is saying, considering the way in which some of our traditional leaders have behaved themselves, and in a way treated their own subjects in a very bad way. And one can be forgiven for doing that. But I grew up under a chieftainship. And at that time, there was mutual understanding between the chiefs and the people. And there was quite a lot of respect and harmony that was going on. And chiefs did a lot of things for their subjects, rather than now when they expect their subjects to do things for the chiefdoms. I have some sympathy with him, but there are also still areas in our country where, people still believe that their leadership should be a traditional leadership. My sense is that perhaps we should allow this to evolve rather than to say we are cutting it now immediately. And with regard to his suggestion that we are just changing the faces when we changing the names. On the one hand, yes, he is right, because in addition to changing the names, we've got to remove the suffering that our people are feeling at the moment. We've got to give them equality. We've got to give them access to the rights that they're entitled to be given to. It's pointless to change the name and leave the situation as it is. So they have to go hand in hand with the name change.
Yeah. Busisiwe, I want you to take a bite at that one as well, from the point of view of government and what their feeling is around the chiefdoms in the Eastern Cape. All right, Busisiwe, you're also muted there at this point.
You get Thabo instances where you have communities where chiefs and kings mistreat the community, but you also get a large number of communities where the rule of law, where discipline, where everything is organized in communities, and that is the rule of law. What is important and what is nice about democracy is that even though we have kings and chiefs as rulers of these communities, they are also guided by the constitution of this country. They also abide by the law that everyone else abides from. But because communities have long been under the rule of kings and chiefs, in some instances and in many instances in the Eastern Cape, your kings and chiefs play a very important role. We are talking now about the Khoi and San chief who fought against the apartheid government. We've got kings and chiefs that fought against the apartheid government. So it tells you that they have long been at the center of fighting and leading the fight for their people. And even now, you see them being at the center of fighting for human rights, for fighting for service delivery in their areas, and fighting for the rights of the communities. At some point, we need to be organized as communities, and it is up to the people to decide who they want to lead them and how they want to lead their communities. It goes back to democracy. But coming to the issue of changing the face and names, we're not just changing names, Thabo, we're changing the identity of people. And the identity is the most crucial thing. Without identity, then you have not much, really. So changing the names, change the identity, what you want to be identified from. I mean, you've got many people whose names...
Respond, as you're talking about changing the identity, respond to Naledi's issue that she raises of the process being too slow, the process of transforming our heritage landscape. 30 or so years, 26, just under 30 years. It's been too long. Hold that thought. We'll come back to it in a moment because I want you to respond to it when we come back from the break. Naledi Chirwa, Busisiwe Jasmana Mantashe, Advocate Bongani Majola, as well as Christian Martin with us tonight. We get more of your questions coming through via WhatsApp and on Twitter at Newzroom 405. Still with us, our panel tonight, MP for the Economic Freedom Fighters, Naledi Chirwa, speaking on behalf of the MEC for Arts and Culture in the Eastern Cape, Busisiwe Jasmana Mantashe, as well as Advocate Bongani Majola from the Human Rights Commission. Christian Martin, he is a Khoi activist with us tonight. Let's go straight to you, Busisiwe, then. Talk to me about that question of how long it is taking to transform these spaces and why the process is taking so long.
Actually, I think we are both on the same page. We agree with Naledi that the pace in which we are changing the status quo is not moving in the pace that we would want also as government, that this is now the time for redress. But also, Thabo, democracy in itself is a process. And in the process, remember, you have to do the consultation. People have to raise their names, they have to do the research, because I think what is at the center of the debate now is that there are opposing views saying that they're not happy with the name, this and that. It speaks to how you then have to make sure that the process is thorough and that you follow the correct procedures to make sure that you actually change the name and not go back to say, and then you get an objection and then that is overruled. The will of the people must be done. Also, it is the people themselves who actually apply. So it speaks to the people themselves being able to stand up to say, no, this is not right. Actually, we do not want to live in this community named after this person, and therefore we want things to be changed. Yeah. And we are starting to see a number of people, the pace picking up, because we have a number of people who are actually raising their hands, applying to the names committee to say, we want this name to be changed. We want this area to be named after so and so. We want this area to be named after this river. So we are starting to see people also organizing themselves to say, this is what we want as a society. And I think that is what makes this whole process then worth it, because it is the will of the people and they're getting exactly what they want, those who continue to take part in those democratic processes.
Now, you've told us of the 4 applications. Can you tell us how many objections you received to these name changes?
I won't be able to have that over the top of my head, but what I can tell you is that on the objections that were received, a thorough look at those was done and they were responded to. And it was found that they are not valid enough to actually prevent the work of the committee to actually do the work. Even when the name then was proposed, there were objections and they were responded to. That is why the committee then took a decision to take the proposed name to the National Geographic Names Committee, so that it can take it to the national minister. So objections that were there were responded to, and they were found that they were not valid enough to actually prevent. Like I said, it would be reasons that money should be taken from this. It is not the correct time. We are dealing with COVID. And actually, just last year, Thabo, money, the budget for sport, recreation, arts and culture was cut to try and say, this large amount of money must go to the health department to actually assist with COVID-19, but we cannot close door and shut the whole department to say we are not going to continue with this, because it is the mandate of the department. And like we said, it is not moving in the pace that we want. So we need to continue with that mandate and actually transform the system.
Let's take some of the objections as well that are coming through tonight on WhatsApp. This one from Mira Fong. It's Silo saying, name changing in South Africa is a waste of money. I don't see the use of names being changed. All right, let's take another one. All right, that's it. All right, then. Let's talk to this question, Advocate. Can we put a price to the transformation agenda? Unmute for us there, please. Advocate Majola, you are still muted. If you can unmute for us, please. Can we put a price to the transformation agenda?
We cannot put a price to the transformation agenda because there's just so many things that need to be transformed. You know, apartheid was a destroyer, and in order to transform the country from the destruction that apartheid caused to us, we cannot say, well, we will spend so much and so on, because we are not going to be the equal, united South Africa that we're supposed to be if we are going to spare the price. My sense is that, no, we've got to do everything we can, even if we do not benefit ourselves, but for our posterity, that we've got to do the best we can in order to get these things right now.
Christian Martin, I want you to respond to the question of the chief doms and the oppressive regime of chiefs in a democracy. There are those, I mean, once the community feels they are under the oppression of chiefs, surely they are no longer serving in the way that they should be serving their people.
Now, I think the two ladies have addressed that question with a doctor of the human rights. There's some of the chiefs that are doing these things, and then there's others that are really doing their best as to assist their community and those people that they are trying to improve their lives. I think the other thing that I really want to come in is this whole notion about can you put a price on the name changes? Now, for me, if you look at what happened in South Africa over the many years, how minerals have been stolen and taken abroad. If you look at the biggest diamond ever found here, still in the possession of Queen Elizabeth, then we can say there's enough money. And one thing for sure is that there will never be a price tag against the lives and the destruction that have went through this country called South Africa. I will always come back and say, we were almost killed, murdered, brutalized, maimed to the brink of extinction. How do you put a price against that? When it comes to the dignity of these people called the Khoi and the San, you can never put an amount to that. So for us, we know what it is to be poor. We know what it is to have nothing. And when it comes to us, we don't even have nothing. We have the half of nothing. So there's no amount of money that we can say tonight that no, the money can be used for this, that, and the other. Remember, the Khoi and the San people have an opportunity now where their history would be told from the hunted and not from the hunter's position. So for us, this is the best ever time that could have come in the history of South Africa.
All right, now, lady, I'm going to give you the final word here. We literally have just under 30 seconds. But look at, for example, you're calling for name changes of airports and the likes, particularly the Nomzamo Madikizela Mandela name that you want forwarded. But let's look at, for example, OR Tambo International Airport. It has been changed, but are we living up to the ideals and their vision? Is it being realized?
Look, Tabo, what we should primarily problematize is the political will of the ANC, the ruling party, because I think sometimes we shy away from the fact that they are governing right now. And their insistence to not change the lives of Black people, to not reverse the impact of coloniality, of colonialism and apartheid, to not address the economic injustice that people face. And it is quite a sad experience to even hear young people bring up the economic positionality as a counter effect to the fact that transformation has to happen. It speaks much more broad to the fact that ANC, just beyond the issue of transformation and renaming places, that they've primarily failed to change and address the issue of colonialism, of apartheid in South Africa, and how it has impacted Black people in particular. Because even namhlanje, we are still debating the issue of names. We should have progressed to even speaking about, not even speaking, to having realized the economic impact of it mirroring the demographics of South Africa in terms of race, in terms of gender as well. 51% of South African women should be owning land in South Africa, and a much more bigger effect to that in relation to Black women in particular. So we should start leaving those silly conversations that want us to digress from the broader picture of insisting that transformation is necessary, of transformation is an urgent thing, and that transformation cannot wait any long further. In fact, we should even divorce ourselves from the word transformation and call it what it truly is and what it should be, and that is decolonization. Our national anthem should mirror the reality that you live in South Africa, in an African country, and get rid of this term. Our curriculum should mirror the fact that we are Black people, that our history does not start in 1652 and so on and so forth. Yeah. Our universities, academia, and everything in this country, economically, socially, culturally, should mirror the reality of our demographics as a country. And there is nothing that is keeping us from that.
Out of time, unfortunately,
Naledi. Is political will. All right.
I'm going to have to leave it there. Much appreciated. Thank you very much for joining us. Member of Parliament for the Economic Freedom Fighters, the Naledi Chira, as well as Busisiwe Jemsana Mantashe, speaking on behalf of the MEC of Arts and Culture in the Eastern Cape. Advocate Bongani Majola with the Human Rights Commission, and Christian Martin, a COI activist. Thank you very much for your engagement as well tonight.